Hi there, my name is Cassidy Cash, that's Shakespeare Girl, and this week I'm going to be taking you over to a presentation I did for the Renaissance History Podcast. Every year, twice a year, Heather Teysko offers a virtual summit for Tudor fans, and she graciously asked me to speak at this last one on Shakespeare and Robert Devereux. Since this week on That Shakespeare Life, we had guest Claire Asquith visit with us today, and she came on and talked to us about Shakespeare's involvement in the Essex Rebellion, and this talk ties in very nicely with what she shares with us. So to share that history with you, I am going to share at least part of the presentation. Now, because this was a conference presentation at the Tudor Summit, to see the entire presentation, you will have to register over at Tudor History Summit. But I'm going to share the first half of it with you this week as we ask, did Shakespeare participate in the Essex Rebellion? My name is Cassidy Cash, that's Shakespeare Girl, and today I'm going to tell you about William Shakespeare's involvement in the Essex Rebellion. You may know about the Essex Rebellion and that Robert Devereux tried to overthrow the Queen and failed, but you may not know that one of the pivotal players in this rebellion was William Shakespeare himself. In fact, it was a decision by William Shakespeare that helped put the rebellion into motion. Robert Devereux was the second Earl of Essex, and he and William Shakespeare were almost the same age. They were born about a year apart, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that William and Robert Devereux were actually friends, but even if they weren't friends, they definitely knew each other. Now, this matters because traditionally in Elizabethan theater, for most of Elizabeth I's reign, theaters weren't what we think of them, we have them today. There wasn't a building where you go and the theater hosts plays and you can come and buy tickets and attend there. That did happen during Elizabeth's reign, but it happened at the end. The very first purpose-built theater wasn't put in London until 1597 by the Burbages. So all the time prior to that, theaters relied very heavily on their patrons, and the patrons would support the theater by inviting all their nobles to their house, and the playing company would be played to put on a performance for their friends at their home or at ends at court. And it was a very travel, very group association. It wasn't people come to us, the playing company went to them. And so the patron played a very huge role in the life of the theater and in the life of the playing company itself. So William Shakespeare would have known and had a very close relationship with his patrons, which included the Earl of Essex and famously Henry Wriothesley, the Earl of Southampton, who also plays a role in the Essex Rebellion. The plays during this time period really demonstrate just how massive the social and political upheaval was that was going on in this kind of storm around William Shakespeare when he was putting on his plays. And to demonstrate how everything flows together, I want to introduce you first to Leicester's men. Now, Robert Dudley was the Earl of Leicester, and he was the Queen's favorite. He was actually her choice for a husband, although she never did marry him. She promised him again and again that she would. They were favored at court, and he was her favorite, and they flirted, and it was this very romantic, very public relationship. And he would often organize events for the pleasure of the Queen. He was a military leader under Elizabeth, and so he could invite her to visit her troops. And one time that he invited her was at Kenilworth Castle. And this was a famous event in 1575. He invited the Queen to visit her troops at Kenilworth Castle, and she showed up and she stayed for 3 weeks, which was a massive statement by Elizabeth for her favor to Dudley. By this time, Dudley was already the principal patron of literature and the arts and Elizabethan theater. In many respects, Leicester's playing company was the premier company of Elizabethan drama of its time, and its involvement would establish the business and structure format for many playing companies that followed after it. Dudley himself was involved in ushering in the format for the theater that would ultimately play to Essex's advantage when he led the rebellion. The format that helped Robert Devereux form his rebellion later was instituted as a form of theater by Robert Dudley and Leicester's men. And we have evidence of this in a letter from James Burbage. The letter is dated January of 1572 for James Burbage and the company, suggesting that the players were not merely the earl's liveried retainers, but that they were actually household servants. And this distinction allowed them to come and go around London without restriction. And they further put in place that they did not want money from the Earl of Leicester for their performances. Instead, they wanted to enjoy his legal protection while operating as an independent commercial entity. This worked out really well for the Burbages, and in terms of furthering into modern theater, this was a pivotal moment for the economics and innovation of the theater industry. But for Robert Devereux, it played a key role because later, when he was in financial ruin, he was still able to use the theater as part of his rebellion because he didn't have any money, but this clause made it so that that didn't matter. Now, we mentioned that he entertained the Queen at Kenilworth Castle in 1575. Well, the playing company that performed for the Queen that day was Leicester's Men, and they put on a massive presentation. And Kenilworth Castle is only 12 miles outside of Stratford-upon-Avon, and this celebration was no small thing. It was massive, and it was known everywhere around that this was going to be going on. And so it's not unheard of to think that William Shakespeare would have traveled over to Kenilworth Castle to witness this spectacle. At the time, Shakespeare was a small young boy. He would have been 11 years old at this time, but there's historical evidence to suggest he did actually go and see Leicester's Men perform this play, because in his works, there's a reference to Arion riding a dolphin, and that was part of the presentation that Dudley presented for the Queen at Kenilworth Castle. The quote is, "Arion on the dolphin's back." It's from Twelfth Night, Act 1. That is an indication that William Shakespeare would have seen the play when he was 11 years old. Now, famously at Kenilworth Castle, that's where Robert Dudley and Queen Elizabeth decided to call it quits, as it were. It's where it became officially and painfully obvious to both of them that there was going to be no marital future between the two of them. There was too much scandal around Robert Dudley's potential killing of his wife in order to free himself up to be available to Queen Elizabeth, and the scandal around that just crushed any chances they might have had. And this is where it really became official, was at that event. And the very next year, Robert Dudley married Lettice Knollys in 1576. Now that matters because Lettice Knollys was Robert Devereux's mom. And we don't know what Queen Elizabeth's opinion was. I mean, we know that she was very unhappy with this marriage. She banished Lettice Knollys, and she was very upset about that. But Robert Devereux was presented at court as a very young man, and he was very well received by Queen Elizabeth. She showed him a great deal of affection. Some historians call it a kind of maternal affection. There is speculation that she felt towards the Earl of Essex a kind of motherly affection because he represented the kind of son she could have had with Robert Dudley. That's entirely speculation, but what's not speculation is she had a genuine affection for the Earl of Essex, and she demonstrated that at court repeatedly. Now, in spite of, or perhaps encouraged by, her genuine affection for him, the Earl of Essex was, for his entire life, known for his conspicuous daring. He was quite free with his emotions. He was thought to often be too familiar with Queen Elizabeth in public, and would behave in this very impetuous fashion. In spite of his audacious personality, he had an extremely successful military career. By the time he was just 20 years old, he had distinguished himself in the Netherlands. He was made Master of the Horse in 1587, and he was made Queen Elizabeth's spy master by the year 1590. Elizabeth would go on to give him a monopoly in sweet wine, which made him very, very rich, and she appointed him to her Privy Council, which made him one of her closest advisors. Now, his audacious and conspicuously daring personality would come to a head on the Privy Council, and he made a lot of enemies with the other people on that council. He had a hot temper, and he was often spiritedly jealous of the other people on the council. And by the late 1590s, he was at odds with people like Sir Walter Raleigh and Robert Cecil, coming almost to the point of armed conflicts with these men. There are reports that Essex publicly drew his sword on Queen Elizabeth in a verbal quarrel at court, after which he had to do something very daring to regain her favor because he lost it quite quickly. You don't draw your sword on the Queen. And that's how he became appointed to leadership in Ireland. In 1599, the same year that William Shakespeare built the Globe Theatre, Essex embarked on a military expedition to Ireland. And that entire move was considered an apology on Essex's part to Queen Elizabeth to try and regain her favor. Many believe that the attempt to go to Ireland and succeed was what inspired Shakespeare to write Henry V. The public in England were concerned about this ongoing war, and they needed something to inspire them that this was going to come to an end and that England would fight strongly there. And that was part of what played into Shakespeare writing Henry V. Now, in addition to inspiring the populace by writing Henry V, Essex was Shakespeare's patron, and as such, he could request what he wanted them to perform. And additionally, they were probably friends, and so Shakespeare would have been personally motivated to rally support for Essex through what he was putting on stage. The theater was a known political weapon, and it was used to influence the emotions and opinions and political stances of the people of England. Pretty exciting stuff, right? The rest of this presentation and the rest of the story about Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, and Shakespeare's involvement with this rebellion, including his staging of Richard II, is all included in my presentation for the Tudor Summit. And the link for that is below this video. You do have to register for the Tudor Summit to see the entire presentation, and the link to sign up is below. Now, the virtual summit happened live a couple of weeks ago, and this is a replay that I'm providing for you. And so when you register, you'll be registering after the fact, but you'll still get access to their Facebook group where you can talk with other Tudor fans and you can talk with other people who study this time period and think it's really interesting. You'll find out about Heather Teysko, and of course, you'll be connected with me because I'm in that group too. So to check all of that out, please see the show notes below. I will link both to the Tudor Summit as well as to some more articles I think you'll find interesting on Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, and Queen Elizabeth and this entire chaotic, dramatic story. But that's it for this week here at Did Shakespeare. My name is Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. Don't forget that we will be traveling to Shakespeare's England. We'll be visiting Stratford and London for 4 glorious days. We'll be taking a tour over there for private dining experiences and private tours of behind-the-scenes looks at the Globe and Shakespeare's birthplace, as well as getting to walk around New Place, where William Shakespeare walked himself. And we will even be visiting Banqueting House, which is the place, it's the last remaining section of Whitehall Palace, and it's the exact place that Elizabeth I demanded Shakespeare show up the Tuesday before Essex was executed and perform Richard II. It's one of the only places left in England where you can actually visit a location that Shakespeare actually performed himself. It's pretty fascinating, and we'll be going, and you can come with us in September of 2019. For more information on that trip, please see the show notes below, and don't forget to sign up for that email list because email subscribers get access to the $400 discount that off of the regular standard ticket price that will go on sale in October. That's it for this week. I hope you guys have a Shakespeare-filled week, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.